Good evening. My name is Janet Pichardo. I'm the Director of Family and Community Engagement, and I welcome you to our Parent University session for this evening. And our topic is talking to your children about sexual health. Bienvenidos a todos los padres que están con nosotros. Gracias por asistir a nuestra Universidad para Padres. La sesión de esta noche es cómo hablar con sus niños sobre salud sexual. Before we move forward, I will say in Spanish to our Spanish-speaking families how to access the translation, our interpreters that are available this evening. Para nuestros padres que están en esta llamada ahora, por favor, para poder tener acceso a nuestros intérpretes, la presentación va a ser completamente en español. Si miran hacia abajo de su pantalla, van a ver un globo que dice Interpretation. Cuando presionan el globo, le va a salir, vamos a decir, la opción de poder elegir el idioma español. Pueden entonces presionar el idioma español y de una vez van a poder escuchar el intérprete. El intérprete va a estar disponible durante el tiempo completo de nuestra presentación. Okay, so before we get started, I just wanted to read off some norms so that families have an idea of how our format will be for this evening. So again, in front of you, you'll see it in both English and Spanish, and you can follow along. So the presentation will be a webinar format. You will not be able to see each other, only the panelists and the facilitator. The panelists will try to answer as many questions as possible. Microphones of all attendees will be muted unless the attendees raise hand to ask their question live. Also, session will be recorded and posted in the district website. We will go ahead in a few minutes, go ahead and post the YouTube channel on our chat. The chat is not available for interaction, but rather myself and also another colleague on the call or on the Zoom right now will post links. And so we'll alert you to check out the link as soon as we make it available. And so we also here are sharing the website for the district. In order to, our interaction will be two different ways. So our families have the option of choosing Q&A if you prefer to ask your question live. I mean, actually, if you ask your question in writing. So please, as soon as you press question Q&A, you can go ahead and write your question. And if you go ahead and press raise hand, we will see your hands raised. And then what we'll do is that we will actually call your name that appears on your video, and we will ask you to unmute so you can go ahead and ask your question live. And so one of the things that we prefer you to do for this particular session is to hold off on your questions. But if you prefer to also ask a question live, you can keep your hands raised. So what we'll do is, again, our presenter who I'll introduce in a few minutes, will let us know when it's time for Q&A. But in the meantime, during the presentation, we'll try to remind you in between to go ahead and insert your questions as you listen to the presentation. We don't want you to forget any question. So we want to make sure that there will be some interaction. We also want to make sure that you don't leave the session having any question unanswered. Okay, and with that said, this screen here, just to share with you very quickly that we will have some raffle items at the very end of the session. And so these are the 3 different items that we will present to you right after our presenter exits our session. And so again, these are donations that have been provided to us to make sure that we can make this a little bit more fun. We rather do this in person, but these are the options that we have right now. So again, item 1 is Cardi's ceramic container. It's a very nice container. Item number 2 is a family 4-pack Roger Williams Park Zoo tickets. And also item 3 is Cardi's beautiful bright painting. So we have some pictures here for you. So again, we'll go through these again a little bit later. Okay, So with that said, it's about 6:05 and we have about 40 people on the call, about 40, 42, actually 42, Dr. Wesley. So we have a nice audience. Okay, so I turn it over to you, Dr. Wesley. I'll have you just introduce yourself and you can go ahead and share your screen.
That's great. Thank you so much, Janet. Thank you to all of you for being here. I'm just going to share my screen, and can you see that okay, Janet?
Yes.
Okay, is my sound okay? Good, good. I didn't hear you, but I could see your mouth move because I think you're muted. So I'll take that. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you all again for being here. It's just really a pleasure to be here. And I just want to say thank you, because I know you could all be doing lots of other things, but you decided to be here. So thanks again. And also the park, the zoo tickets look awesome. So I hope somebody gets those, and maybe I'll see you at the zoo. So I just want to kind of start and jump in and tell you a little bit about who I am as a way of introduction. So first of all, I'm a physician. So I'm a pediatrician and adolescent medicine specialist by training. I also do research in adolescent health. Really my area of focus is helping parents talk to young people about sexual health. So it seems like this is a good topic to talk about today. I think maybe more importantly than either of those two first things actually for today are the fact that I'm a dad. I'm a dad of 2 students in PPSD, proud PPSD parent. And I'm also a member of a couple of committees at the PPSD level, a community volunteer in the Health and Wellness Committee and the Healthy Relationships Working Group. So just wanted to put those things out there as sort of the context and things that I think about the world through. I also think it's important to say right up front is like, I'm going to be talking about sexual health today. So like, just be mindful of the people around you. If you don't want folks, listening or hearing what we're talking about, feel free to use some headphones if you want. It's not going to be an anatomy lesson. I'm not going to be sharing a lot of pictures. So I just like to say that up front. But if you do want me to clarify anything, if you have any questions, please do put it in the Q&A. And then at the end, I built in some time, so we'll have some time for questions. So I might not catch them as we're going, but please do put them in there because I'm excited to hear what you all have to say and excited for that part of the talk because that's always the most fun and interactive. So let me just go on and say, what are the goals for today? Right. So first, I hope you come away with this with some ability to define sexual health. Like, what does that even mean? Second, I'm going to tell you a little bit about these 7 C's of resilience. And really, it's just one sort of framework that people use with respect to parenting. What I'm going to do is try to use that framework and talk about how to use it to help you talk about sexual health with your child. And also to kind of avoid some of the common pitfalls that sometimes we fall into as parents. And throughout the talk, I'm going to mention, like, I'm going to sprinkle in some resources because I think that's really a helpful part of this. And don't be afraid or don't worry if you miss them, because at the very end, I'm going to have a whole list and I have a link to a Google Doc where they're all spelled out and you can hyperlink to them and it'll be great. So don't worry if you miss them as we go. I will come back to it at the end, I promise. So where are we going? We're gonna, do those things that I mentioned. And, like I said, there'll be a Q&A at the end, okay? So, but start thinking of your questions now. I'm sure folks probably are coming into this presentation already having a bunch. So I'm excited to hear them and maybe I'll address them and maybe not, we'll see. So let's talk about what is sexual health. What do we even mean by that? So the World Health Organization defines it in a few different ways. And this is actually relatively new, 2006 wasn't that long ago, but it was the first time that any kind of international group had said, well, what are we even talking about? So according to the WHO, it encompasses a lot of things. So it's not just about our bodies and sort of physical parts of sexuality. It's also about emotional and mental health. And it's also a social thing, right? It's about other people as well. It's not just about being free from diseases or infections or pregnancy. It's also about well-being, meaning like it's something that we have to think about when we're well, and it's part of life. It also says that everyone has the right to sexual health, that everybody has the right also to feel good with respect to their sexual health, to feel safe. And that's something that applies to everyone. Also that people who deal with this, schools and health providers, everyone should think about using a positive approach, a respectful approach. Frankly, that was not always happening in the past and still doesn't always happen, but that's something that they recommended. And again, they emphasize safety again. So really that no one should have to deal with coercion, discrimination, or violence related to sexuality or sexual health. And again, all people, not just some people should have this, like all people should have it. So I think those are important places to start. So given that definition, let's talk about a model we can use kind of as parents, really for all things related to working with our young people and helping our young people become happy, healthy adults, but certainly with respect to sexual health. So let me talk about this. This is a really great book. Ken Ginsberg is a colleague of mine in Philadelphia, and he wrote a really nice book and talks about the 7 C's of resilience. He didn't make up the 7 C's, but he did a good job of like summarizing, and it's really a very digestible, clear book that I think is really helpful. So the 7 C's are competence, confidence, character, contribution, coping, and control. I also like it because they all sort of see. So it's sort of like easy to remember. It's okay if you don't know what all those things are. I'm going to go through them each one at a time and tell you kind of how they relate to sexual health. But before I do that, let me just share a couple kind of key concepts that I think underlie all of the 7 C's and a lot of the things I'm going to tell you about today. First is that young people tend to live up or live down to the expectations that we have for them as adults, right? Not just as parents, but as teachers and in other contexts. And also that young people need adults in their lives who believe in them and love them unconditionally and hold them to high standards, hold them to high expectations of being compassionate, generous, creative. And notice I didn't write in there, and I didn't say like straight A's. I didn't say never having sex ever in your life, right? Those are actually not what I'm talking about. Those are also not necessarily reasonable expectations, or we're not looking for perfection. But we know that when young people get high expectations from the adults around them, they tend to rise to those challenges, but only when they're given the tools to do so. So that last point is really important. I'm going to say it. I'm just going to read it right as it says. So what we do to model healthy resilience strategies for young people is more important than anything that we say about these strategies, right? So one more time, anything we do is not actually as important. The things that we do to model them are more important than the things that we say. All right, I messed it up the second time, but you got it the first time. So that's going to come up again and again, as the modeling is so important, not just around sexual health, but so many things. So let me take you through some of these ideas. Now I'm going to show you a table. It's got a lot of words on it. Don't feel like you have to memorize it. It's sort of a summary of everything I'm going to say. I'm going to show it to you at the end. If you like had one slide, you were like, okay, I'm going to take this slide, I'm going to like put it on the wall. This would probably be it, because it sort of talks about all the different C's. It talks about the misconceptions I'm going to go through, some of the different strategies that you can use, and then some of the resources that I'll mention. Okay, I know that was a lot of words, so I'm going to go through them one at a time. So let's talk about this first misconception that I think comes up a lot. So something I hear from parents is that my child is too young. They're too young for me to start talking about sex. And sometimes they'll say that, sometimes they'll say, I don't know when to start that conversation. So I'm going to relate this to this idea of competence. So let me tell you what competence means. By that, I mean the idea that when we notice that young people are doing things right, and we give them opportunity to develop skills, they feel competent. They feel like they know what they're doing. We undermine that competence when we don't allow them to recover after they make a mistake, after they fall, after they mess up, right? So what does that have to do with sexual health? All right, well, let me start by saying something obvious. We all have a body. We all are born with a body. But something maybe less obvious is that we all also have sexuality, right? From the time that we're born, we have sexuality. We're born with it, where it develops over time. And it includes our bodies, but it also includes things like the changes that we go through in puberty, things that are part of our identities, ways that we're attracted to people or not attracted to people, and also the ways that we see our gender and how we express our gender. So really, it's not ever too early to start talking about sexual health. The challenge is usually more about like where and how and what do we say, right? So the answer that I think is most helpful is to start talking about bodies. And then also kind of weaving in things about respect and safety for younger kids. So I'm talking about preschool, elementary age children. And then as your child grows, like building on those things with some of the other concepts we'll talk about. I'll also just say that it is normal and healthy for children to start exploring their bodies, trying to think about what are these parts of my body? Why does this person look different than me? That is a normal part of being a child. And it's also normal for them to be thinking about gender and like, what is my gender? And what is this person's gender? What do body parts have to do with that? It's also normal for young people who are older, you know, middle school, high school, to like start exploring relationships, start exploring like, am I attracted to this person? Do I like this person? And some of those eventually do develop into sexual relationships, into more physical relationships as they become adults. Some of those ideas about gender and gender expression are also very prominent this time, also just part of a normal kind of progression of adolescent development. And then I also say that when you look at and ask people who are 25 years old in the United States, I'm just talking about the United States right now, if they've ever had sex, some kind of sexual experience of some kind, 90% of them have, right? So we know that by the time people are 25, almost everyone has had some kind of sexual experience. However, when you also ask those people if that was a positive experience or not, the vast majority of people, boys, girls, who are asked about their first experience say that it was not a positive experience, right? That they either had mixed feelings about it, that they had negative feelings about it, that they were coerced into doing something they didn't really want to do, right? None of us want that for anyone. We want everyone to have a positive experience when they do decide to engage in those kinds of things. So I think that that's really important to think about, in addition to some of the things that you've, I'm sure, heard about, whether it's sexually transmitted infections or unintended pregnancies, right? Sexual assault, these are all real problems. But the best way to help our children avoid these problems is to have, and also to have positive experiences in the future, is to talk with them early and often and help them build those skills that they need to be safe and healthy. All right, so how can we give them those skills? Like, what does that look like? So part of it is by asking questions, you know, and encouraging their natural questions that they're going to start asking. That's just what kids do, right? They, especially preschoolers and kindergartners and first graders, they just ask question after question after question. So instead of shutting down those questions about sexuality, we want to encourage those questions, right? Because what that does is it provides prompts and it shows that you are a person that it's safe to talk to you about these things. One way to do that is with some resources, right? So this is a great book that I recommend. It's called It's Perfectly Normal. It's one of my favorites. They also have this website that I show where you can kind of preview a chapter. Most people, it's hard to go to the bookstore these days. So, you know, Amazon doesn't always let you preview things, but their website does. So I think it's a really nice book because it's a very nuanced, kind of balanced discussion of a wide range of topics. It's not boring, it's not preachy, it's got cool like graphics and animations. So I think it's really readable for young people. And I think it's actually a really nice book for parents to kind of educate themselves too.
Dr. Wesley, Dr.
Yeah.
Wesley, I'm sorry if I can interrupt you for a minute. Just
Yeah.
want to remind folks that might have come in a little bit late how to access our interpreter. So if I can just repeat that for a minute.
Great, yeah, go ahead.
Para nuestros padres que tal vez llegaron a la reunión de Zoom un poco tarde para poder escuchar esta presentación completamente en español, mire hacia abajo de su pantalla y presione el globo que dice Interpretation, está abajo a la derecha. Cuando lo presiona, entonces elija el idioma español. Gracias.
Okay. All right, great. So it does say on this book, by the way, it says 10 and up. I think that's a little flexible, right? Like I think you have to know your child and you can read and feel like this is appropriate for my kid who's maybe 8 or 9. or maybe not until they're 11 or 12, so I think you have to think about that for your own child. It's not sort of a hard and fast rule, but I think, 10 is a good kind of place to start. So let's move on to the next pitfall. So here's one that I hear sometimes. It's if they hear about it, they're going to do it. Another kind of version of this, like, if I talk to my kid about sex, it's going to sort of encourage them to have sex. So I'm going to try to relate this to one of the C's called confidence. And just to tell you a little bit about what confidence is. So when I say confidence, I'm talking about how this idea that young people need confidence to navigate the world, to think outside the box, to recover from challenges. By the way, parents need confidence too. And that's part of why we're here, is to kind of build our confidence as parents. So, but like, why is this pitfall about, if I talk to them, they're going to have sex? Why is that related to confidence? Well, first, let me say that decades of research have shown that this is not actually true. That there's nothing about talking about sex that causes young people to go out and have it more, have more partners, get pregnant earlier. In fact, the opposite is true. So what we see is that young people who are not talking to their parents about sexual health are actually at much higher risk for all of those things, all of the negative things that we've been talking about. And why is that? So part of it is because kids are sponges, right? They are soaking up information all the time. It's all around them. The world is their oyster. That's true of sexual health information too. And if you pay attention, you'll notice that it's everywhere. It's on TV, it's in music, it's in all kinds of media, social media, print media, the radio. It's in conversations that they're having at school with peers that they're overhearing. It's in conversations that you're having at home. You might not think about this as sexual health, but like talking about bodies, talking about your relationships, those are all things that kids are soaking in. So really, our role as parents is not to sort of put a protective bubble around our kids, because that's not actually possible. You couldn't do that. You literally could not put a bubble around your kid in this way. So really what our role is to help them sort through all that information, to understand it, to filter it through their values, through your values as a family, and help them understand what it all means. And with that kind of understanding comes a lot of power. It's the kind of power that you get from having confidence that you know what's right for you, right? And that takes practice. It takes practice to build that confidence, just like it takes practice to learn an instrument or a sport or math. All those things take practice. So I hear from some parents sometimes that they're worried about, how do I help my kid have that practice, right? They're like, I don't know what to even say. I feel like I want to have all the answers before I even talk to them. Guess what? I'm just going to burst your bubble right now. I know we're talking a lot about bubbles. You're never going to have all the answers. I don't have all the answers. My kids ask me things all the time. And I'm like, you know what? I have no idea what the answer to that is. So instead of avoiding those conversations because you're worried about that, you can actually do something really powerful, which is model that it's okay to not know, but that we can find out the answer together, right? So you can say things like, wow, that's a really great question. Let's go learn about that. And you can use some of the resources I'm sharing with you today to do that. And what that does is it shows children that like the process is important, that like as a parent, you don't know everything, but that you're going to help them figure it out. And that's going to encourage them to keep talking with you, but also it's going to help you learn what's on their mind and then learn how to answer those questions using your resources. Another great strategy is using teachable moments. You might have heard this from, your kids' teachers, or just know this idea, but basically like there's all these tiny things that happen every day, and you just want to grab a couple of those here and there. Keeping your eyes open for all those things, the radio, the TV show, the conversation, oh, Joey said this to Susie today, and saying, oh, tell me more about that. Like, what do you think about that? Right? That's a really powerful question. And then you have to listen. That's the trick. Asking the question is step one, but then listening to what they say and resisting the urge to correct them or talk over them or say, no, that's wrong. Just listen to what they say and then ask them more questions. If you've asked them a couple of questions, you're going to have a really good conversation going. If you're talking more than they're talking, that's a really good way to shut down the conversation. So that's another kind of strategy that I recommend. Here's another great prompt and a resource to kind of start some of these conversations, and also a place to go where when you're not sure what the answer is to the questions they're asking you. It's called Amaze. And it's a great website that they also have a Facebook feed, by the way, and a YouTube channel, because that's just what people do now. And they have a ton of really clever and engaging videos that are brief, they're animated, they're just fun and kind of funny. And they use humor a lot to kind of defuse the awkwardness of sexual health. They're full of fact-based information, which I think is sometimes hard to find these days. And they have a huge variety of topics. One of my favorite elements of this website is you can create an account, and then you can actually put together a playlist for like your kid over here who's in kindergarten, and then your kid over here who's in 5th grade, and 2 totally different playlists. They can watch a video, but they can't watch all of the videos. They can only watch the ones that are on the playlist. So I think that's a really nice element of this. They also start for like preschool age kids and go all the way up through young adulthood.
Niños de escuela preescolar.
I can hear you, Luis. So yeah, so I'm just going to keep going. So stop me if you need me to. But yeah, so they also have a ton of parent resources. So things about how to start the conversations. They also have a whole site just for teachers. So I'm a big fan. So let's keep going. Speaking of teachers, this is another pitfall that I hear sometimes, and that is, maybe this is really just the school's job. So let's talk about that. Another kind of version of this is, maybe I just want to outsource this to somebody else to talk about. And there's sort of pros and cons to that, right? So let me try to connect this to one of the C's called connection. That's a lot of connect, sorry. But what we do know about young people is that connections with other people, schools, communities, faith communities, provide security and allow young people to stand on their own and develop creative solutions to problems. So let's talk about why do we need more than maybe just parents? Schools are a really important source of sexual health information. And I think I will just speak to PPSD. I know PPSD is trying really hard to improve sexual health education, but a lot of schools really struggle with this. They don't always have the time, the resources, the training, the funding to do sexual health education well. Some are better than others. Every school is a little different. And so I think that is a really important source of information. We need to keep encouraging and supporting schools to do comprehensive sexual health education. And there needs to probably be more than that, right? We also need to employ parents. That's why we're all here. We also probably need to engage with religious organizations and faith-based organizations around this. Some of those organizations are really trying to do this well. Some are just avoiding it altogether. And some are not using fact-based information. So I think that's something we really need to look at too. What we do know though, is when kids are hearing similar things and getting that reinforcement from multiple places, it allows them to feel connected to other adults and peers, not just their parents, right? And that can help them engage in these conversations in healthy ways and create a network of support, especially if they don't always feel comfortable going to their parent first or second. So those peers can be, or those adults can be family members, friends, religious leaders, teachers, physicians, and other healthcare providers, but they can also be peers, right? So one thing that I'll just show you here is some local organizations in Providence that do really great work with peers. These are generally like middle school, high school age youth that work together, and they do have some really great programming around sexual health, as well as a lot of other topics. There's also some resources here about schools. So and certainly reach out to me or the FACE office if you're interested in getting involved in PPSD's efforts around sexual health education. And there's also some resources here for religious organizations that have implemented some of these curricula in their kind of religious education. So let's transition now to the next pitfall. So this one is, if I just tell my child sex is wrong, they're going to listen to me. All I have to do is tell them. I think you probably are getting the theme now that that's probably not going to work, right? Because we've talked a little bit about telling is not necessarily the most effective way to change behaviors or to impart kind of your values. So this relates to a lot of the C's that I've mentioned already, but I'm going to relate it to one called character. And I think the word character means different things to different people. So let me tell you kind of in this context, I'm going to use it to mean the sort of idea of how do we help young people develop a clear sense of right and wrong, and also to think about integrity and to have integrity. Like, how do we help them do that? So the focus, I think, when you're trying to do this in the area of sexual health is to focus on respect. And again, respect is sort of like a word with a lot of different meanings, but I don't mean it like, you know, your child takes everything that you say and other things that every other adult says and follows them to a T, right? Sometimes that's how we mean it when we are saying, why aren't you respecting me as a parent, right? Or a teacher might say that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the idea that when young people have a strong sense of self-respect, that they value themselves as a person, but also when they value other people and have respect for other people, they're much less likely to violate the rights of other people, whether that's sexual assault or other ways of violating people's rights. But also they're much less likely to be the victim of something like a sexual assault because they are not going to put themselves in positions that are really vulnerable. And so I think this idea of modeling comes up again, right? So it asks us to consider that instead of telling, really what we want to try to do is model respect, right? As a parent, to your child, to other people. And so how do you do that for yourself? Like, how do you show your child that you have a respect for your own self? Do you share the challenges that you have in your life and the victories that you have? You know, whether it's managing stress, whether it's like getting enough sleep, you know, whatever it is, also related to sexual health, you know, managing relationships, fighting with your partner, you know, those are part of sexual health too. So you're kind of showing how you have respect for yourself in that context. And then for others, are you talking about when you interact with other people, whether it's your child or your partner or strangers, you know, how are you respecting those folks and kind of making that clear, kind of modeling that respect for others? And those things speak really loudly. They speak much louder than our words. So let me share kind of a related resource too. Yeah, I told you I would sprinkle these in. So TeenSpeak is a really cool resource developed by a colleague of mine, Dr. Jen Salerno in Michigan. And she has this great kind of program. It's all kind of integrated. It's got a bunch of different platforms. There's a physical book, there's an audio book, there's like an online interactive modules. And they really cover a wide variety of parenting topics. You know, they're focused on parenting teens. There is stuff in there about sexual health, but there's stuff about just like all kinds of different things that come up with when you're parenting teens. So speaking of TeenSpeak, another thing that I hear from parents sometimes is my child tells me everything. Okay, so let's tackle this one, right? I'm going to try to relate this to something called contribution. It's a little bit of a stretch, but just go with me for a second. It relates to a lot of the C's. Oops, sorry. Contribution is this idea that when young people feel they're contributing to the world and the lives of others in a positive way, they learn that serving people feels good. You know, they also learn that they're part of something that's bigger than themselves. It allows them to kind of get out of their own heads a little bit and be in the service of others. So let me step back from that for a second and say, it's normal and common for children to feel uncomfortable telling everything to their parents. That's just super common. It's also developmentally appropriate for young people as they get into adulthood, as they make that transition, to become more independent and to do kind of their own thing and not necessarily rely on their parents for everything or tell their parents everything. So keeping that in mind, we want our children to feel comfortable coming to us to ask for support, to ask questions about anything, and certainly around sexual health. At the same time, it's not a great idea to sort of assume that you know everything that's going on in your young person's head, in your child's head, right? So instead of assuming, you can ask. You can always ask, and you can kind of assume that you don't really know what's going on for them necessarily. And so I think that's a little bit of a safer place to come from, is assuming that you don't know. So in the context of sexual health, I think this is where parents can encourage children also to contribute to other people, right? So whether it's in those peer relationships, in those organizations that serve young people, whether it's in a religious-based organization setting, whether it's school, helping your child find opportunities where they can mentor others, where they mentor younger children or students, right? And share their experiences if they feel comfortable. We don't want to force them to, but if they feel comfortable, including their struggles. Maybe it's about talking about their first period. Maybe it's talking about their experience with mental health challenges related to relationships. There's a variety of things that they can do, and really that has value. Other young people really value the voices of their peers, and we can help our children become young, role models for others, just like we are trying to be role models for them. So one area where this kind of concept comes up a fair amount is sexual orientation and gender identity. And we can have a whole conversation just about that. And so feel free to ask me questions about that and put those in the chat too. But I did want to share some resources related to that too for parents and young people in that area. So there's a ton of really great organizations and folks in the province area doing work with young people in this area. And so I just wanted to share some of these resources with you, and happy to talk more about that. So let's keep moving because we're making good time, but I want to make sure we get to the questions. So I'm going to now talk about the next pitfall, which is bad things happen to kids who are reckless and impulsive. That's something I hear a lot from parents. Like, my kid is not going to do that. These other kids, that's why those bad things are happening. So I'm going to relate that to this concept of coping, right? Coping. So when I'm talking about coping, what I mean is that young people who have a variety of healthy coping strategies are going to be a lot less likely to use unhealthy coping strategies. Or in other words, when they're feeling stressed, to turn to kind of dangerous or unhealthy ways of managing that stress. So this takes a little bit of explanation and thinking. So stick with me for a minute. So when we think about things that we generally think of as being risky or not super healthy, usually when you really dig deep, a lot of those things are actually ways that young people are trying to manage and deal with the stress that they're feeling in their lives. So the problem is that sometimes when parents, and I've certainly done this as a parent, that sometimes we get mad at our kids and we punish them for doing those things. And because we kind of want them to not do that. We don't want them to be unsafe. We want them to be happy and healthy. So we feel like if we can just teach them a lesson, then they won't do it again. Unfortunately, that doesn't really work. It doesn't turn out to be a really effective way to change behavior. What it actually does is it causes young people to feel shame, to feel fear, and those emotions actually drive more negative behaviors and also drive more secretive behaviors, meaning hiding it from parents, whether, this applies to sexual health, but it certainly applies to substance use, other things that we consider, not the healthiest. And so we have to think about, okay, well, what really does work and how can I help my young person cope with or be healthy and happy? And so there's a couple of strategies. One is trying to find out what is causing your young person to be stressed, kind of trying to get to the bottom of what is the stressor and what is causing that. That relies on some of those strategies we talked about before. So, creating conversations where people feel safe. Also encouraging, before there's sort of a big argument, encouraging positive coping strategies. So this could be anything from, healthy exercise to mindfulness to drawing, getting enough sleep, all the things that we know are ways that we as adults can manage stress. We also need to help our young people develop those for themselves. Everybody's going to be a little different and going to have coping strategies that work better or worse for them. And that also part of that is not just saying, hey, you need to sleep better, but actually modeling those positive coping strategies ourselves, right? I keep coming back to that idea because it's super powerful. If you are not getting enough sleep, that's sending the message that sleep is not really that important, right? If you are stressed out all the time because whatever, you're not exercising or you're skipping breakfast or whatever the thing is that's causing you stress, that sends a powerful message that those things aren't important, that taking care of yourself is not as important as whatever the other things are. And so sometimes it takes a step back to say, okay, how am I modeling these positive coping strategies? So this is a little of a tangent, but I think it does apply to what we're talking about. And it's like a nice example of resources on Amaze. I haven't actually put this on my refrigerator, but I think I'm going to because I found this. And it just kind of is like a nice reminder of 5 really impactful strategies and kind of ways of thinking about talking about sexual health. We've talked about some of these things already. It's never too early. It's never too late. There's never just one conversation, right? One of the things we'll talk about in a minute is multiple small conversations, those teachable moments, open-ended questions. Tell me more about that. What do you think about that? You don't have to wait till they ask, right? You can be proactive. We've built those skills today, hopefully, and you're not going to mess it up. And even if you do, you can say, you know what, that was like a weird thing to say. I'm sorry I said that. They're always going to be there, right? You're going to get a do-over. So it's not a one-time thing. All right, we're getting close to the end. So stick with me. You're doing great. So then the next pitfall is if they can't date, nothing bad will happen. Kind of a variation of this is like, well, if I just take away their phone, then it's fine. So let's talk about that. So this is related to this C called control. And again, control is one of those kind of heavy words. But in this context, I'm not talking about you controlling your young person's behavior. I'm talking about young people controlling themselves and having a sense of self-control. And part of that is having a sense of privileges and the fact that respect can be earned when you're responsible and you take responsibility for your actions. And when young people feel that, they tend to make wise choices and they feel like they have a sense of control over themselves, around their world around them. That is really hard to do. I think this is one of the hardest things to do as a parent, as a young person, is to create this sense of control, right? So again, we're not talking about your sense of control over them. I'm talking about, because that's fleeting also, by the way, right? Like you can say, yes, I will take the phone away, or I will not let them date, but we all know that eventually they're going to have to do those things, or they're going to have to be exposed to the things that we worry about. And so instead of just avoiding them, and then the young people, they soak up the sponge of the world around them and they learn it from other places, we want to try to teach them how to approach these things in a healthy way as parents. So I think one of the ways that this manifests itself right now is like we have such a online internet focused world. Everybody carries around a little internet device with them at all times, including our children. And so there's not a ton that we can do to sort of avoid them seeing, interacting, and doing things online that impact their sexual health. What we can do is still monitor those things, and I'll talk about that. And we can also teach them to be critical consumers of the things that they see and hear. And by that, I mean not just taking it at face value, but actually thinking about who is sending me this message, where am I seeing this thing from, what does it mean? Does this fit with who I am or what I want for my life or not, right? That takes a lot more work, right? Excuse me. So how do we do that? So there's a couple ways to do that. I'll talk about making a media plan in a second. I'll talk about putting some guardrails around device use. But also, we know that young people are going to make mistakes, right? They're a normal part of adolescence. We know that when people learn, they make mistakes. And so we have to be prepared for those mistakes as adults. And instead of coming at those mistakes with anger and shame and guilt, we want to try to come at those with patience and communication and love. And that's hard to do. That takes a lot of effort. But we know those mistakes are going to happen. So let me share a couple resources around the media piece, right? Because this is a hard thing, right? It's not just phones, it's also the internet, it's also TV. And so, and this is not just for young people, right? Like as adults, we also need to be thinking about how are we managing our own media use. And so this is a really helpful resource from the AAP that talks about creating a media plan for your family. So I definitely recommend all of my patients and all the people I work with to do this. It does take a little time. You have to like, if you just do it yourself and you don't tell anybody in your family, it's not gonna be that effective. So it's helpful to like sit down at the table and do it together, or at least talk about it and have a conversation about what this looks like and set some expectations around what the hours of the media use are, you know, how are you going to check in? And it also talks a little bit about how you can put some parental controls on your child's phone and tablet and computer use, because that is a hard thing and it's always evolving. The other one is, and I'm just going to tell you now, we're not going to talk a lot about pornography today, but I am going to say the word pornography because as a parent, you are going to have to deal with pornography. I'm just being realistic. It's just the truth and the reality. And so we need to figure out how to talk to our kids about it. They're going to see it at some point in their lives, probably, because it's all over the place. And so Amaze has a lot of really great resources on this. I'm not going to like belabor the point, but just to say that like it's important, and we want to include that in our conversations about sexual health for our young people. There are also kind of on the same theme. I really like these two books by Peggy Orenstein. She's a leader in this field for many, many years. She's an amazing speaker, by the way. You should have her at your next parent university. And she talks about boys and girls in the context of our society and the messages that they're getting and what we can do as parents, but also as adults, you know, with respect to policy, can do to help them. She really spent a ton of time just talking to individual young people and some parents too, but she spent hours and hours and hours and like years and years talking with individual young people. And really it's a very compelling couple books. So I highly recommend these two. Okay, we made it. We made it through the 7 C's. This is that table that I showed you at the beginning. And it kind of talks about all of those things in like a one nice summarized slide. I'll also just give you a couple take-home points to take with you. One is focusing on building resilience. And to do that, really the key things are listening and modeling. Start talking about sexual health early, but also know it's never too late to start. Think about how to do those teachable moments, those little chats over time, as opposed to the one sort of sit down, okay, it's time for the talk, right? It's much more effective to do the small chats over time. And then use the resources that I gave you, use other resources, but don't feel like you're in this alone. And think about what is age appropriate at different stages and make sure you're getting information that's based on facts. This is the time for questions. So I'm excited to hear your questions. I put my email in here. You can email me later. This is also the link that I think Janet is going to put in the chat for a second. You can scan this and it's got the list of resources in there too. So I'm going to stop talking now and excited to hear your questions.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Rusley. Very interesting topic and information and all the resources. So thank you so much for sharing those. We do have a question, is in Spanish, is actually a written question. I'll read it out loud. And again, just reminding our families to please use the Q&A if you want to write a question or make a comment. Please go ahead and we'll go ahead and read it out loud for you. If anyone right now prefers to ask a question live, just press the little hand at the very bottom where it says raise hand. We'll look for your name and we will call your name and go ahead and then ask you to please unmute yourself, and then you will be able to ask your question live. So first I'll ask the question that's in writing in the Q&A. It is in Spanish, so I will read one comment at a time. Why are there so many children and adolescents in schools coming out as gay. There are many also that are using drugs, and they do everything, a lot of things in the bathroom of the schools. And adults never know anything. This is a question.
Okay, yeah, thank you for that question. So let me take the first part of the question first. So there are data to support what you're saying in terms of there are more young people who are identifying as gay or bisexual or transgender now than in the past. And I think there's a few reasons for that. I think number one is that there are more young people who are feeling comfortable sharing their identities with other people as opposed to keeping them hidden. I also think that there are more in our world and in our society and in our young people's environments, they're seeing more examples of people who are out and talk about that and share their experiences and are positive role models. And so they realize that that is actually something that they can think about. And if it feels like it fits for them, then they can talk about it too. Whereas I think in the past, and certainly when I was growing up, that was really not something that was a common topic of conversation. And when you look back throughout history, we know that, you know, since people were people, people have been attracted to different genders, people have had different gender identities. So that's not new. That's been going on for a long time. And it's part of the sort of normal variation of what it means to be human. But I think what you're seeing now is that as we're talking about it more and people are more comfortable sharing what they feel on the inside and who they are, I think that's why you're seeing more young people coming out. The second part of the question, I think, is about substances. We could have a whole other conversation about substance use. But I think maybe the part of the question that I want to try to address is like sort of the secretive nature of young people. And I think that's really what I'm hoping to work on as part of this conversation. And I think it applies not just to sexual health, but kind of anything about, you know, young people, is that young people are really stressed right now. You know, they're dealing with a lot of things. They always were, but I think now, you know, talking about COVID, talking about losing family members to COVID, talking about, you know, being out of school for many, many months, even years, being really disconnected from things that are meaningful to them in their lives and structure that kind of helps them find that kind of competence and confidence that we talked about. I think that this is a really hard time for young people. And so I would just sort of encourage all of us to think about when we see those things happen and we hear about those things happening, wherever it's happening, to think about it not like, oh, why are those kids doing those bad things, but thinking about like, what's going on for those kids that they feel like they need to hide something or that they need to use a substance to feel good, as opposed to finding other things in their lives that are positive and help them feel, you know, comfortable and confident. So that's my thought about that.
Okay, we have another question. Does PPSD teach any sex ed in elementary school? If so, what is the curriculum and who delivers it? Classroom teacher? Gym teacher?
Yes, thank you for that question. That's a really good question. So I think I'll try to address the second part first. So the teachers at the elementary school level who are teaching sexual health related content are generally school nurse teachers or phys ed teachers. There generally are not like specific health educators in elementary schools. And so every school is actually a little bit different. One of the things that PPSD is doing right now that I'm involved with is actually trying to wrap our hands around who is doing, basically trying to answer that exact question, like who is actually doing the teaching, and how do we best support those people? And so to answer the first question, there really is not one set curriculum for elementary school related to sexual health education in PPSD. And I think that really is, I'm just sort of like speaking for myself here when I say that I think that's a problem. I think that there needs to be a curriculum, and I think we need to provide the teachers who are teaching it the support that they need to like feel comfortable talking about these concepts too, right? Because especially sometimes this is not the training that they had when they were teachers, right? Things have changed over time. And so maybe even if they were trained to do this 10 or 20 years ago, you know, a lot of the ways that we think about these concepts has changed over time. So I think that really needs a reboot or an update.
Great, thank you. We have one person that has raised their hand. If we can go ahead and allow Gina. Let's see, allow to talk, Gina Billiard. Gina, if you can go ahead and unmute yourself, please.
Hola, hola, hola.
Hola.
Yo quiero hacer una pregunta como genérica, pero en especial de mi caso. Yo tengo un niño que tiene un IP, tiene 5 años y yo he estado teniendo muchos problemas con la escuela, muchas preguntas que no tienen respuesta en el departamento estudiantil, mucho inconveniente con el tema del transporte, que no se lo pueden dar. Entonces, yo he tratado como que de buscar información, de ver cómo yo puedo hacer que él esté más cómodo y que él aproveche el tiempo en la escuela. Y se me ha hecho muy difícil. ¿Es posible que en el futuro o en los futuros planes se pueda como que armar un proyecto que pueda ayudar a los niños que realmente no tienen un problema severo, pero que necesitan un poquito más de ayuda? Porque eso yo encuentro como que es una cosa como muy pobre.
Ok, Gina, entonces tú no tienes tiene una pregunta sobre el tema de hoy.
No exactamente.
Ok, so Gina, lo que vamos a hacer es, vamos a poner el teléfono de nosotros, de nuestra oficina, para ayudarte con cualquier inconveniencia que tú has enfrentado hasta ahora, para tener esa conversación contigo personalmente. So, si tú el chat, busca el teléfono de nosotros, ya lo pusieron, y así entonces mañana, ¿ok? Muchas gracias,
Porque
Gina.
fue que yo llegué muy tarde, pero gracias.
Está bien, gracias. Gina actually had a concern and also shared, it was out of topic, but so what I did was I just directed her to go ahead and look at the chat, and we provided our phone number from our office to help her with some challenges that she's facing right now with her child who has an IEP, who is a 5-year-old. And so I just, told her that we would be able to give her a call tomorrow for her to call us, and we posted the phone number in the chat. So we'll go ahead and we actually have another person who raised their hand. María Fuentes, por favor, si usted tiene alguna pregunta, si puedes activar su micrófono. María Fuentes.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Mi pregunta es, si mi hija no quisiera recibir las clases de sexo, ¿qué puedo hacer para que ella no las reciba? Porque es muy avergonzada ella.
Ok, déjame preguntarle.
Gracias.
Sí, quédese ahí, no se me vaya. Dr.
No,
Rosley. Okay. Dr. Rosley, the question is, if my child did not want to receive any sex ed because she feels her daughter is very shy. How could that happen? Could she, is that an option? If sex ed was being offered.
Hey, yeah, no, great question. Thank you for that question. Gracias. So first of all, in PPSD and most districts, parents can and do have the option to opt out of sexual
Okay.
health education for
Excuse
their.
me, excuse me, Mr. Rusley. Let me just tell Ms. Fuentes that she can go ahead and unmute, and so that way she can hear your response in Spanish.
Oh, great.
Señora Fuentes, usted puede ahora desactivar su o prender su micro o apagar su micrófono para que pueda escuchar la respuesta en español.
Okay.
Gracias. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. I'll start over just in case. Yeah, so thank you for the question. And so in PPSD, sorry, in PPSD and in most districts, parents do have an option to opt out of sexual health education. And so that's something you can certainly consider. I will just say that you might want to also consider not opting out. And I'll give you a couple of reasons why. I think you brought up a really important point about your daughter being shy. And I think that is a concern that a lot of parents have, that like, they're not sure that their kid is, or their child is ready, or that their child can deal with the information, or that they're going to understand it. So I think there's two things to consider. Number one is that I think that's why it's really helpful to be informed as a parent about what exactly is being taught and what the curriculum is at your school around sexual health education. And so one way to do that is to reach out to the school leader and just ask that question. You can also contact the FACE office and Janet and ask that question if you don't feel comfortable going to the school leader, and we can help facilitate that, or she can help facilitate that. So that's number one. Because I think the idea that parents not knowing what's going on is a good thing doesn't make sense to me. I think the more parents know what's happening, and the more they're involved, and the more they can be, part of the conversation about sexual health education, but like really all kinds of parts of school, I think are a positive thing. Number two is, I would say that most young people really want to know this information, and they really are interested and eager and curious about these topics. And so if we don't give them ways to hear about sexual health education, in a fact-based way, they're going to go other places to find that information. And it's probably not going to be the most positive ways. Like I saw in the chat, somebody posted, or the Q&A, somebody posted about TikTok. TikTok, not a super great fact-based source of information about sexual health. There's actually a couple of people trying to post things and do things in that space, but generally it's kind of not a great place to go. But that is where young people often are going for these kinds of concepts, and other places on the internet too, just a Google. So I think if we don't give them opportunities and help them engage in those things, regardless of, are they shy, are they extroverted, are they introverted, all kids, I think, do deserve an opportunity to learn about these topics. And I think parents can be involved in that process and sort of say, yeah, tell me about what you learned, so like we can talk about it, because I want to know too, and you can teach me. And that way you also have a chance to talk about your values, to talk about what's important to you, and to make it clear to your child like kind of where you're coming from.
So we have another question. It's in Spanish. ¿A qué edad se les puede hablar de sexo a los niños? At what age can we talk, or should we talk to our children about sex?
Yeah, so great question. So thank you for that question. I think it really depends on a few things. I don't think there's like a one specific age for every kid. However, I do think that you don't have to start at age 4 talking about, I'm just going to say some body part names here, okay? So you don't have to talk about how babies are made and condoms and birth control, right? You don't have to talk about that at age 4, right? That's probably better for later. But what you can do at age 3 and 4 is talking about bodies, right? Talking about, this is your body, like this is your head, this is your nose, this is your belly, and then using the body parts and using the names. I think sometimes parents will use kind of silly names or goofy names or names that they were taught for body parts. So like a pee-pee instead of a penis, or of a JJ instead of a vagina. I think that actually is a little bit challenging for kids because then they don't actually have the language to know what their body parts are. And so that can lead to confusion later on. So generally I recommend using the actual names of the body parts when you're talking about those things and saying like, yeah, you have that. And like, isn't that interesting? And like, what do you think that's for? And yeah, you're right. Mommy has this and daddy has this, you know, so like, I think those conversations can come naturally because kids are in the bathtub, you know, like kids are getting dressed and undressed. And so I think they're going to be naturally curious about their bodies. And so that can be sort of a way in. And then over time, it's going to be about safety and like, what is a safe touch? Like, when is it okay to hug somebody? When is it okay? Like, you got to ask before you hug. You know, that's sort of a way to start talking about boundaries and body, you know, what's a safe space for you. And that can sort of lead into other things later down the road about like having respect for yourself and respect for other people. Is partly about respecting each other's boundaries and personal space. And so anyway, so that's sort of like a long answer to your question, but there's like not one age. I think you have to think about what's right for your kid wherever they are. I think that's why the Amaze videos are really nice because they're like fun for pre-K, kindergarten, and then there's more kind of sophisticated ones, or not even sophisticated, but just more mature topics, you know, as kids get older, and you can kind of pick and choose ones that are right for you. And I believe they're in Spanish and in English. I should have checked that before this, so I'm sorry. I believe that you can watch them in either language. And so that's kind of nice too. I'm pretty sure they have subtitles as well. So.
Great. So we have another question. Thank you so much for this excellent talk. My question is there a good guide for parents to learn how young people are using pronouns? Young people are using pronouns, gender identity pronouns.
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. It's an excellent question. There are actually a ton of books now about pronouns, and I really am excited that that's happening. I'm trying to think of a specific one. I don't have like a title at the top of my head, but I think those resources that I showed you, and I can even go back to my this slide right here, is going to be a good connection for you. I think this first one is actually put together by one of my colleagues, and it's got a ton of resources. But there's the one that ends with parents / is specifically for parents. And so it has things on there about pronouns. It has things about lots of other topics. I think Youth Pride is also a really good resource for that. And I think can link to books, but there's like children's books, there's like young adult books, there's like pronouns for grownups. And so I even saw one recently. I should have added this to the presentation. That was like a cool graphic novel about pronouns. So I think, you know, the reality is like, it's something that is changing and feels different, right? Like when we're talking with people and they use different pronouns than maybe we expect, it's easy to sort of stumble over that. And so my advice to parents and to just people that I work with and talk to in general is to, you know, it's okay to say, I'm sorry, can you tell me what pronouns you prefer, right? So that's okay. it's better to do that than sort of use, assume what somebody's pronouns are, or use the ones that they don't prefer. So that's the sort of like very, very simplistic conversation about pronouns. But yes, there's definitely some books, and I think those resources can point to some of those. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and but we can keep taking questions.
Sure. So we have another question. ¿Cómo puede actuar o reaccionar un niño o niña en el momento que le ofrezcan drogas? Muchas veces lo hacen dentro de los baños. So the question is, how can a student act or react, female or male, at the moment when they are being offered drugs? Many times it happens in the bathroom. And again, I believe this parent is referring to the bathroom in schools. So I guess it's more like a suggestion of what advice would they give their children on how to react.
Totally, yeah, no, thank you for that question. And I think I would apply what I'm gonna say to a lot of different things, right? Because we know that young people are going to be faced with a variety of different choices throughout their lives about paths that they can take or not take that may be healthier or less healthy. And so I think that relates to sexual health. I think that relates to substance use. I think that relates to what they want to be when they grow up, right? Like, so I think we all are kind of faced with a lot of these difficult choices. So the question asked about substance use and kind of being offered substances in the bathroom. And so I think as a parent, for me, I feel like I go back to like, okay, what led up to that moment? And what have I done as a parent to help my young person feel confident, right? We thought that was one of the C's, that they know what's best for them. They know what's healthy for them. They know what's important to them. And if that's not really there and they don't feel as confident in themselves and what's important to them, they're probably going to be more likely to make an unhealthy choice. Same thing with the competence one. That was one of the other C's, right? If they don't feel like they're good at something, if they don't feel like and it doesn't have to be academics, right? It could be a sport, it could be an art, it could be a music, it could be, whatever the thing is. If they don't feel like they have something that they're really excited about, then they're going to be a little bit more likely to make a choice that's probably not as healthy, because they want, just like every young person does, they want to fit in, they want to feel they want to belong. And so they're going to be a little bit more vulnerable to that kind of pressure from their peers. And I always like to tell parents too, that like, even though we talk a lot about peer pressure and there's all these things, and I totally get it because I also worry about that with my kids and my patients. Again and again, study after study shows the number one influence on young people and their behavior is parents. The number one, more than peers, more than TikTok, more than, Joe Rogan, whoever you're talking about, parents still win. And I think that's always going to be true. It's always going to be true. Do parents believe that, or do they know that, or do they feel that way? I don't think they always do. So sometimes my job is to come here to talk to my parents in my clinic and sort of say, you are the one you've been waiting for. Like, you have the power to help your young person. You are really the most influential person in your young person's life. And so sometimes we just need to, I think as parents, say like, okay, I got this, and I'm going to take that on. It's a day, it's not like a one-time event, obviously, so it's an ongoing struggle, but you all are doing it. You all are doing the best you can, and so are all of us. So.
Okay. I wanted to ask you one more question. Is there, because I know it can be very hard for parents to, number one, initiate a conversation, and then continue to hold the conversation. feeling really uncertain. Okay, so I wonder what question, my child is going to ask me in a minute. How am I going to respond? Is there a resource like the ones that you probably did share? One of those reasons or resources include, common questions and then an appropriate, friendly, understanding response that parents can, at least, peruse, review, so that when they either decide to initiate or that when they actually are at that moment where they need to be ready, maybe they can just refer to that particular resource.
Yeah, great question. I would say that's maybe the number one question that I get asked. So yeah, I think the two resources that I think most fit what you're wondering about are the Amaze website that I shared, and then that book, which I actually have right here, and I'll just like hold it up again because I obviously have it in my house. It's perfectly normal. It's not super long, so it's like relatively, it's not like you have to spend 3 years reading it.
Dr. Rossley, can you put the slide that you had the book, so then that way,
yeah,
if they're interested, they can just take a picture of it?
yeah, totally. Let me do that right there. Okay. So can you see that, my screen here?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so let me just go to that slide. Yeah, so this is that book. And this is the publisher's website. It's not like Amazon. I mean, you can get it on Amazon, but I like the publisher's website because you can like look at the first chapter before you buy it. So that's kind of nice. I actually went to the bookstore and I like read it, not the whole thing, but I looked at it because I think it's not the kind of thing where you just want to like buy some random book because this guy that you went to Zoom told you to buy it, right? Like you actually want to look at it and be like, does this feel like what I want to talk to my kids about? Does it feel like this fits for me? So I think that's, there's a lot of books out there. So I would say do a little bit of research, but this is one that I think is a good balance of, it's not boring or, too preachy, but it's also really comprehensive without going into like so much crazy detail that it's like 1,600 pages. So I do like it for that. I think the other resource, and I'll go to this one too, is Amaze. I just keep coming back to this myself, but I recommend it to parents a lot because like we just sort of live in an age where people want things in like little bite-sized chunks. That's why everybody loves watching YouTube video. That's why people love podcasts. That's why people, they love their Twitter feed. I don't know. I don't actually love Twitter, but people like the little thing. And so this is like a really engaging video that's short. It's kind of funny, but there's a ton of them. And you can search for like, say your kid's like, hey, Dad, what's the deal with, I don't know, I'm just gonna like make something up. What's the deal with periods? Like Joey told me like, I'm gonna have my period sometime next year. Like, what's that all about? You'd be like, oh crap, what do I do? You can just type in periods and it'll give you like 16 different videos. And you're like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe this is a good one. And it can just sort of help start that conversation without being like, so let's talk about periods, right? Like that's sometimes an awkward way to start. So sometimes the video can be a way to little break the ice and start the conversation flowing. And you can also, watch it beforehand. So you can be like, okay, do I know what to say? Do I know what I'm talking about? So I think that's a nice aspect of it too.
Okay, so this is our last question for the evening, and then we're going to ask you if you can share one more thoughts or announcement. But this parent asked, first of all, if you can confirm that there is a sex ed curriculum that the district does follow for health classes, if you can confirm that that is the case. And if that is the case, you mentioned earlier that perhaps there is that chance that a parent can opt out from the sex ed curriculum. But how can a parent actually authorize or I guess opt in force something like this, or is it automatic? It's happening anyways. It's just that parents have to let the school know that they do not want their child to, to participate in a sex ed class.
Right, right. So yeah, just to be clear, thank you for that question. Just to be clear, at the middle school and high school levels, there is a curriculum that's being implemented. And at the elementary school level too, there is, I think, just to clarify maybe what I said before, I think at the elementary school level, each school is implementing it pretty differently and some more than others. And so I think that's just a little uneven, is my opinion. And so I think that's something that, is something that we're working on in the committees that I mentioned. But yeah, in order to opt out, you just have to contact your school leader and just have a conversation with them and make that request. I don't honestly know 100% if there's like a form that you have to fill out. That might depend on the school, and I'm just not aware of that, so I don't know for sure. So I'm sorry, but I do know that that is something you can do. In terms of opting in, you don't have to opt in. And so, but you can opt out.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So that's pretty much for our question and answers. Dr. Rusley, this has been a great experience. Just having you respond to all the questions, but even all the resources that you have shared. And so we truly appreciate it. Please be on the lookout for our fall and spring sessions for next year, because I definitely will be reaching out. I think this was a great turnout. It's obvious that parents are very interested in learning more of how can they actually have conversations that could be difficult and uncomfortable. But we have to have them. So it's exactly what you said. We should have them, and we must have them. So thank you again for taking the time to share your expertise with us. And so if there's a last message, Dr. Rusley, that you would like to share.
Yeah, just thank you again for you, Janet, and for PPSD and the FACE office for everything that you do. And don't forget to fill out your surveys. I think there's a few more days, right?
Yes.
Because I think that's a really important way to make your voices heard as parents, and tell all your friends to do it too.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Rusley, before you leave, there were some folks that did arrive late after your introduction. So if you can just remind folks again that you do participate in our Health and Wellness Committee.
Right. Yeah. So I am like a community member, meaning like I'm not paid by the district. So I just come and participate and try to help that committee. So there's a Health and Wellness Committee, and then within that, there's something called the Healthy Relationships Working Group. So I'm a part of both of those.
That's wonderful. And that's one that we're really appreciative of that. So thank you so much. We hope that you have a great evening, because we're going to continue now with our giveaways.
All right. Hope somebody wins all the things. I wish I could win the zoo tickets. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you. Okay, para nosotros, so for the rest of us, we're going to finish our evening with an evaluation. If you can just go ahead